Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone. Before we get started, I would like to ask everybody to please rise and join me in a salute to the flag. Hand over heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing for a moment of silence for those who were killed on 9/11, 18 years ago today, and for the men and women serving in the armed forces who are protecting our liberty and our freedom. Please be seated. Good morning again. On behalf of Joseph Torregrossa, Chairman of the Board of Fire Commissioners from Franklin Square, I'd like to welcome you. He couldn't make it today. He is ill. He's suffering from the toxins that were breathed in during the rescue and recovery efforts down at Ground Zero 18 years ago today. My name is Christopher Gioia, and I'm a fire commissioner with the Franklin Square Munson Fire District in the town of Franklin Square, New York, Nassau County, which is near the Queens border. I'm a Marine Corps veteran, and I have been an active volunteer firefighter with the Franklin Square and Munson Fire Department for 33 years. I am also a former EMT and an ex-chief, having served 5 years in that position. I am currently employed as a construction surveyor with Local 15 Operating Engineers, New York City. And I have worked in the heavy construction industry for the past 30 years, specializing in reinforced concrete, major foundation work, and structural steel. Today I am here to announce the launching of our Justice for 9/11 Heroes campaign, which is being spearheaded by the Franklin Square and Munson Fire District. On the morning of September 11, 2001, I was working on the Brooklyn side of the East River, just north of the Williamsburg Bridge, and had a spectacular view of Manhattan and the Twin Towers. Having been an eyewitness to the attacks that day, and from being called to duty to assist the Fire Department of New York in the following days and weeks afterwards, 9/11 has never been far from my thoughts, having been burned forever into my soul. The 9/11 Commission concluded that Osama bin Laden and a group of Islamic extremists were responsible and carried out the attacks, and that was to be the end of it. Truth be told, that is far from the end of it. The 9/11 Commission was flawed, and in the words of two of its own, the chairman and the vice chairman of the 9/11 Commission, respectively, Thomas Keane and Lee Hamilton, who stated in their book, without precedent, that they were set up to fail and were starved of funds to do a proper investigation. That's their own words. They also confirmed that they were denied access to the truth and misled by senior officials in the Pentagon and the Federal Aviation Authority, and that this obstruction and deception led them to contemplate slapping officials with criminal charges. The final report did not examine key evidence and neglected serious anomalies in the various accounts of what happened. The commissioners themselves admit their report was incomplete and flawed, and that many questions about the terror attacks remain unanswered. Nevertheless, the 9/11 Commission was swiftly closed down on August 21st, 2004. The failings of the official investigation have fueled too many half-baked conspiracy theories. Some of the 9/11 truth groups promote speculative hypotheses, ignore innocent explanations, cite non-expert sources, and jump to conclusions that are not proven by the known facts. They convert mere coincidence and circumstantial evidence into cast iron proof. This is no way to debunk the obfuscations and evasions of the 9/11 report. But even amidst the hype, some of these 9/11 groups, including architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, pilots for 9/11 Truth, and the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, to name a few, raise valid and important questions that were never even considered, let alone answered, by the official investigation. The bottom line here is that the American public has not been told the complete truth about the events of that fateful autumn morning 18 years ago. What happened on 9/11 is fundamentally important, but equally important is the way the 9/11 cover-up signifies an absence of democratic, transparent, and accountable government. Establishing the truth is, in part, about restoring honesty and trust and confidence in the American political system. That is why, on July 24th of this year, the Franklin Square Munson Fire District voted unanimously to adopt a legal resolution of support for the special federal grand jury investigation before the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. The almost 3,000 innocent people who were murdered right before our eyes that day cannot speak, so it is left up to us to speak for them and demand that their voices be heard in a court of law with subpoena power and an impartial jury to consider all of the evidence by placing 9/11 under a microscope and investigating everything and anything down to the smallest of details, with the same veracity as the recent Mueller investigation into Russian collusion, and not before a commission of political appointees who had the rules dictated to them by some of the very people who were being investigated, or who had conflicts of interests, and which should have led to several members of the commission to recuse themselves. I demand to know, as should everyone, especially the media, why important testimony made that day from over 150 police, firefighters, and first responders regarding explosions wasn't included in the commission report, nor investigated further. Why didn't the FBI or NIST examine the wreckage for explosives? Why wasn't Ground Zero considered a crime scene and sealed off and processed accordingly? Why was crucial evidence of melted structural steel suppressed and not even considered, or worse yet, allowed to be carted off and destroyed? Why won't, after 18 years, mainstream media such as ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, or Fox News, and if Fox News here, I take that back and I apologize, report on any of this, let alone ask the hard questions of how and why certain things occurred the way they did, especially in the collapse of the third World Trade Center building, building number 7, that most people don't even know about. And finally, why can't Americans hear about FDNY Battalion Chief Oreo Palmer, who succeeded in making it to the point of impact on the 78th floor of the South Tower with his men, and reported that he had 2 isolated pockets of fire and that we should be able to knock it down with 2 lines. So he made it up to the fire floor, and he saw what was going on. And contradicting the official storyline that it was a raging fire up there, here's a brave fireman who made it onto the fire floor and was doing his job. 1 minute after the final transmission, the South Tower collapsed. Why can't Americans hear about that it took a lawsuit under the Freedom of Information Act by the New York Times to get the fire department tapes released so that the public could hear exactly what the firefighters said? This occurring in August of 2005 almost exactly a year after 9/11 Commission had disbanded. That is not justice. Being in Washington today, I'll put a perspective on in terms of the cost of the 9/11 investigation and money spent on other government investigations. The Mueller investigation cost about $25 million. The Whitewater investigation cost about $60 to $70 million. The Space Shuttle Challenger disaster cost about $175 million and 7 astronauts killed. The Space Shuttle Columbia disaster cost about $400 million and 7 astronauts killed. 9/11 Commission was initially given $3 million and a deadline of 18 months to complete, with a final cost of about $15 million, and the Commission's conclusion was that it was a failure of imagination that led to 9/11 happening. Imagine that. The worst act of terrorism in the history of our country, which claimed almost 3,000 innocent lives and which dramatically altered the course of our nation and the world, and it had an imposed deadline of just 18 months, which was extended by 2 months, and it had an initial budget of just $3 million. Remember what the chairman and vice chairman of the 9/11 Commission said. They were set up to fail, and they were starved of funds to do a proper investigation. Who could have imagined that, given the magnitude of such an atrocity? So it would seem, until now, that we have left unmolested those who set fire to the house and prosecuted those who sounded the alarm. But that is changing. People lie, but the facts don't. All the American people want now, after 18 years, is the truth based on the facts and the remaining forensic evidence and what can be proved in a court of law. That is why we are here today. 343 firefighters, including 3 of my good friends, Thomas Hetzel, Bobby Evans, and Mike Kiefer, perished that day. And these were some of the best and the bravest people in the world. And they, along with the rest of those who were murdered and died horrible deaths, deserve justice.